Before they began their exploration of the Louisiana Territory, Meriwether Lewis traveled to Indiana to join William Clark and gather their team of explorers. Lewis explained, "As I wrote in my letters, Will, because the United States government is paying for this exploration, we will travel as members of the U.S. Army. I asked that we be made co-captains so we would have equal command over our men." Soon they traveled to the city of St. Louis, where the wide Missouri River flows into the even mightier Mississippi River. St. Louis was a frontier town. Its streets and stores bustled with hunters and trappers who had been chosen to live far beyond the more settled cities of the East. Trappers are people who hunt and catch animals to use their fur for clothing and blankets. The two captains knew that it would take courage, intelligence, and skill to reach the Pacific, so they looked for people who knew how to survive or stay alive in forests and on rivers and mountains. These people would need to know how to hunt and fish for food and build shelters in which they could stay warm, dry, and safe. There were no houses or hotels in the Louisiana Territory, so people had to be able to make their own shelters to sleep in. Some were Americans who had grown up in Virginia or Pennsylvania and who had later moved farther west to live in Kentucky. Others were Canadians from the country north of the United States who spoke French as well as English. The two captains finally put together a team of trusty men who were daring and brave enough for the expedition. An expedition is a group of people traveling together for some special reason, such as exploring. Among the men who joined Lewis and Clark's group, one man stood out. He appeared before them one day dressed half in manufactured clothing and half in the animal skins favored by woodsmen. "I am George Drouillard," he told them. "I heard you are going all the way to the Pacific. Ask the others you have already hired about me. They all know me. I speak French, English, and some Native American languages, so I can help you communicate with your men and with many native people you meet. To communicate means to share your thoughts with others. Speaking is one way of communicating. I also know the hand sign languages used by Native Americans who live out on the Great Western Plains. When different tribes meet, they use this sign language, since their spoken languages are not all the same. Sign language is another way of communicating by using your hands. I can ask them about the country ahead and help them understand that you have come in peace." Lewis and Clark had to gather supplies as well as people. They were going to need to take a lot of things with them on their trip. They purchased some long, narrow canoes called pirogues, and one large, wider boat called a keelboat. On the deck of the keelboat stood a little cabin that held supplies. Riders in the pirogues moved their narrow boats forward using canoe paddles, but the keelboat had a sail. Moving the keelboat was slower and more difficult than moving a pirogue. When a strong enough wind was behind the riders, it pushed the keelboat along, but if there was no wind, the men had to take turns pushing and pulling it with poles and ropes. On Monday, May 14th, 1804, the explorers were ready. They called themselves the Corps of Discovery. A corps is a group of people working together. Now they would leave St. Louis and travel west along the Missouri, as President Jefferson had requested. As one of them, Private John Whitehouse, wrote in his diary that day, "We hoisted our sail and set out in high spirits for the Western expedition." At last, they were on their way.